So we're talking about overcoming trauma today and 4 principles that have been so helpful in my own journey from the Bible, psychology, and neuroscience. And whether or not we realize it, trauma is one of the primary things that shapes us, our personalities, our behaviors, the things that we struggle with in life, how we interact with others. And I think it's so important today, especially, to define trauma, because today so many people think anything that is uncomfortable is trauma. I had a negative experience with that person. That's trauma. That's what people think. But that's not the case necessarily. And decades ago, when people thought about trauma, they thought about severe car accidents. They thought about going off to war. They thought about intense abuse. And all those things are trauma, but trauma is so much more than that. I define trauma this way. Trauma is any lasting psychological or biological response to a distressing experience. Any lasting psychological or biological response to a distressing experience. So, trauma is not the distressing experience itself. Trauma is the result of that distressing experience. Psychotherapist Dr. Gabor Mate, I'm not sure if I'm butchering his name, but we'll roll with it. He says it this way: trauma is not what happens to you. It's what happens inside you as a result of what happens to you. See, the reality is all of us experience trauma. We live in a broken world, a world where things are not the way they were originally created to be. We live outside of the Garden of Eden, for which God created us to experience, this place in Eden where all of our needs were met, where we knew God, we were safe with other people, we knew our own value, we experienced shalom, we experienced peace. All of us experience trauma. We live in a world of trauma. And this was my experience growing up. I was surrounded by Christianity. My parents worked for a Christian organization. We talked about Jesus at home. We went to church. We went to small group Bible studies, all of that. But behind the scenes, my dad was an alcoholic, living in ministry, and he was one way in ministry, and people liked him a lot. And then at home, so often he was different. He was physically and emotionally abusive. I experienced his bullying. I experienced his rejection. I experienced name calling by him over and over. And my mom didn't intervene. She didn't put an end to it. So I had all these distressing experiences growing up. I felt this deep pain in my soul. The things that I knew were fear, rejection, and the sense of worthlessness. In addition to that, at school, middle school, elementary school, and high school, I was bullied by people. I was picked on. I was called names because of how I dressed, because of my faith in Jesus, which I was outspoken about, because of the way I talked. And so that just compounded the trauma that I was already experiencing, the sense of worthlessness that I was already experiencing. And in reaction to that, see, here's one of the things we have to get, is that trauma is going to cause reactions. It's going to cause responses, whether it's lies you believe about yourself, like I believed that I was worthless, that I was a reject, lies you believe about God. So the reason so many of us struggle in our relationship with God, struggle to trust him, or maybe we think he's angry or distant or disengaged, is because of traumatic experiences. A lot of times how we learn to relate to our primary caregivers, and then we copy and paste that onto God, or even in our relationships with other people. We think that they're not going to be there, that they're going to let us down, that they're going to abandon us, or we get really fearful of those types of relationships or relational closeness, because our brain is sending off these signals saying, avoid, avoid, avoid. Our brain is fearing that trauma is going to happen again. It can also lead to ways that we cope individually. And this was huge in my story. I began getting really anxious, wondering when's the next time that I'm going to be abused or feel rejected. And so my brain was always on alert. And after a while, when I couldn't fight anymore, it would turn into depression, where I would turn on myself and agree with the lies and believe that I was worthless, that my life was hopeless. I developed obsessive compulsive disorder. And I think for me, it was a way of trying to control things internally because externally things were so out of control. And that primarily had to do with my relationship with God. I was often doubting whether or not I was truly a Christian. I was wondering if God would reject me too upon death. I doubted if I was truly saved. And I just had all these compulsions and these intrusive thoughts about that in response to the trauma that I'd experienced. Eventually, I got addicted to food. I got addicted to pornography. These were just additional ways that I would seek to escape the trauma, escape the pain in my life, and try to bring some kind of calm to my nervous system. See, trauma causes a dysregulated nervous system because we don't just have bodies, we are bodies. We're embodied souls. And so when our souls are wounded, our bodies are going to be wounded as well. And that's going to show up through dysregulation, increased heart rate, discomfort, not feeling safe in your own body. And so these ways that we try to medicate it, be it like me, pornography or food, or for other people, it's alcohol or drugs or tobacco products or scrolling on social media and endless variety and dopamine hits. Those are all ways that we try to cope with a dysregulated nervous system. But God designed us to have a regulated nervous system, to learn how to soothe ourselves in healthy ways, to experience his comfort, to experience the comfort of other people. And that can happen in our lives. Some stats I think that are so important to talk about is that 64% of US adults report experiencing at least one ACE experience. That's an adverse childhood experience before age 18. 64% of adults have experienced an adverse childhood experience. Another study asked individuals globally about 29 traumatic experiences, mostly related to witnessing violence, physical abuse, illnesses, death, and 70% of participants had at least experienced one of those traumas. And it's worth pointing out that what I just talked about, those are big T traumas. Big T traumas are one-time, high-intensity, emotionally distressing experiences. It's what we used to think about 20, 30 years ago, right? When I talked about car crashes or going off to war or intense abuse experiences. But the studies, and there's not a lot of studies on this, but these studies didn't point out little t trauma. Little t trauma are these recurring, lower intensity, emotionally distressing experiences. These are a result of unmet needs, not hearing I love you growing up, or experiencing criticizing or critical words from parents, from friends, being bullied, experiencing manipulation. All of those things can lead to little t trauma, not because it's less painful, but because in the moment it's lower in intensity. But studies show that consistent little t trauma can have just as big an impact on somebody's soul as big T trauma. And so if you grow up in a home where you're not hearing I love you or you're experiencing critical words over and over, that can impact your soul and cause as much trauma as somebody who experiences physical abuse or sexual abuse once. And so we need to understand this when talking about trauma. All of us experience trauma. All of us experience little t trauma, especially. Trauma, as I mentioned, causes this dysregulation in your body. It causes you to always be on alert, to not feel safe in your body, to be hypervigilant, to be stressed often, not to be at peace, not to be calm. And all of us, at times will experience stress. So that's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about is constantly in the state where we're kind of in fight or flight. Maybe not intensely in fight or flight, but it's like we're always just about ready to take fight or flight. Trauma also causes lies we believe, feelings of worthlessness, feelings like we can't trust other people, being skeptical of other people, coping mechanisms relationally, dealing with struggles in relationships, struggling, having closeness and opening up with other people. That's something I struggled with for years. Triggers, flashbacks. In a moment, your brain, your body feels like the past trauma, past thing that happened to you is happening now. And that's what a trigger or what a flashback is. So again, trauma is this result of a distressing experience that results in psychological and biological responses that are ongoing. And these experiences activate our fight or flight system. And then our brain and body becomes stuck in it. You've probably heard that analogy if you're familiar with trauma of when you're walking through the woods and you think you see a snake. And instantly your fight or flight system is lit up and your body goes into, I'm going to run to protect myself. And you're just flooded with neurochemicals and chemicals all throughout your body. But then you realize it's a stick, not a snake. Instantly, all of that goes away. And you move on throughout your day and you don't have any lasting physiological or biological responses because of the meaning associated with the experience. You knew that it was not a snake, it was a stick, and nothing bad happened. But with trauma, we have this distressing experience and we're flooded and our body takes fight or flight, but something actually harmful is happening to us. And so then, because of our brains don't say, oh, that wasn't that harmful, like when we realized it was a stick, not a snake, our brains say, no, that was harmful. And so we go into this perpetual state of living with fight or flight and our brain trying to protect us from that happening again. So that's a significant thing to point out. And our brain starts to take these measures to avoid any situation in the future that seems similar at all. And there are three primary ways this affects our brains. The first thing is it shrinks the prefrontal cortex. That's up at the front of your brain. It's the higher reasoning and judgment portion of your brain. It helps you to make regulating behavior and rational thinking happen. But with trauma shrinking that, it makes it more difficult to regulate your behavior, to regulate your rational thinking. Second thing is it causes the amygdala, the fight or flight part of your brain, to become overactive, to become more sensitive. And the third thing is it shrinks the hippocampus. So that presents these challenges in processing emotions. It causes this greater difficulty in the future discerning what is happening now in the present versus what is happening in the past. And so your brain and your body can think that that traumatic experience is happening right now in the present, even though you are safe. With the nervous system, we talked about this a little bit, but hyperarousal, constant stress hormones, ongoingly being dysregulated. And so this deeply matters because if we don't understand trauma, if we don't understand what people have experienced in life and how it affects our brains, then our attempts to grow are going to be short-sighted. Our attempts to overcome sin in our life, habitual sin, our attempts to work through relational issues, our attempts to grow in our faith when we're struggling to connect with God and struggling to overcome lies we believe about Him are going to be short-sighted. Because if we don't understand the why we got there, we won't understand the how to truly heal and get free. You know, we'll be putting Band-Aids on bullet holes, trying to fix things in our life, solve things with quick fixes and short-sighted attempts at freedom. And we'll get frustrated when our healing and growth is slower than expected, rather than giving ourselves grace, knowing, oh, my brain has actually changed. Oh, this has significantly impacted me. And so I can give myself grace that this is a journey and that God is with me in it. And people want to come alongside me. And that as my soul is healing, my brain is healing as well. In Isaiah 61:1, talking about Jesus, it says that he was sent to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives. Just want to double click on this idea of how we need to understand trauma in people's lives and in our life if we want to truly grow and overcome things and not have short-sighted attempts at freedom and healing. Jesus was sent to bind up the brokenhearted, then to proclaim freedom to the captives. Trauma therapist Adam Young notes that there's a linkage there between having a broken heart and being captive to something. The things we are captive to is directly correlated with how we've experienced trauma and a broken heart. See, we'll never understand people's habitual sin, their styles of relating, their struggles, in their faith journey until we understand their story and the trauma they've experienced. As Christians, as we're trying to care for our friends, reach our friends, share about Jesus with those people, or if we're in leadership, trying to lead people, we're thinking about the anger people have towards God, thinking that he's not a good God, thinking that he's unloving, as we're trying to make sense of evil and suffering in our world, and how so often we can have this assumption that God's not good, he's not loving, he's not real because there's so much evil and suffering. The doubts people have, the questions they have is deeply linked to the trauma they've experienced. My mentor, Josh McDowell, who is a well-known apologist all around the world, who's written 150 some books, has had such an impact. A lot of people think that it was discovering the evidence of the resurrection and evidence for Christianity that led him to become a Christian. That's not the case. For him, it was the love of Jesus through other people that helped begin healing his trauma and opening him up to this idea of a loving God. See, he struggled growing up because he experienced sexual abuse. He experienced abuse from his parents. He had an alcoholic father who essentially said he was worthless. And so this idea of a God who was a father deeply disturbed Josh, because all he knew growing up was that fathers can't be trusted and that they will hurt you. But it was through experiences of loving Christians who loved him, who cared for him, who encouraged him, and ultimately encouraged him to look into Christianity, see if it actually is true, that he began to open up to this idea. He sought out to prove Christianity wrong, but he found out it was true by examining the historical evidence. But it was that love of the Christians who weren't like his family growing up that really helped him be open to the idea and eventually come to faith. See, we've got to understand trauma to be able to reach people and help them. Before I get into more in these 4 principles I want to talk about, if you haven't already, join our Discord community, resolutionmovement.org/join. Every day, people are praying for one another in there, encouraging one another, talking about things like trauma, mental health, porn addiction, and how to overcome it. And we've got so many different free reading plans on each topic to help support you in your journey. So resolutionmovement.org/join. Join us there. So, okay, I've got 4 principles for you all from the Bible, psychology, and neuroscience that have been at the core of almost 17 years of my own healing journey, of being in therapy, of studying the scriptures, of how God has healed me through relationships, from all the things I've read about neuroscience and the things I've written, and the hundreds of people I've got to help and see experience freedom from trauma. So I hope this will be really helpful to you. And so the first principle is that we have to name the trauma. Name the trauma in our life. We were created for the Garden of Eden, but we don't live there. We experience ridicule, rejection, loss, abuse. We witness things. We witness violence all the time. We witness trauma happening to other people all the time. And that deeply impacts us. People who are supposed to support us the most and love us the most often harm us the most. We're surrounded by imperfect people. And so we suffer. We suffer mostly in life at the hands of other people. You probably know David in the scriptures. Essentially, the prophet goes to choose the future king, and David isn't even brought to show up. His father doesn't even think that he's worthy. And then the prophet says, do you have any more sons? And David's father goes, well, I've got this one out in the field. The runt is what the word actually means in the Hebrew. And so he doesn't even think his son is worth bringing to that lineup. And so we can only speculate here, but likely David had some woundedness in his heart, some trauma, some feelings of worthlessness, of rejection, that his dad didn't even think he was worth bringing to be presented as one of the future king. And so David isn't even brought there. Eventually he is, but at first he wasn't. And so perhaps David, and we look throughout his life at all the things he dealt with, and all throughout the Psalms, just the feelings of anxiety, of depression, of distress he was experiencing. Likely some of that started in his childhood, his experiences of trauma that he was reacting to and coping with. And so to heal, we had to first name the trauma in our story, especially growing up. Remember, big T trauma are these one-time experiences of high intensity, and little t trauma are these recurring, consistent experiences of lower intensity. And some trauma comes through attacks, which are aggressive actions done towards us. Name calling, physical abuse, sexual abuse, harmful things intently done to us. But then other trauma comes from absences, unmet needs, people not being there, people leaving the family, a parent being emotionally or physically distant or disengaged. If that happens recurringly, that can deeply harm our souls. And so a lot of times what people do is they try to dismiss or downplay the pain they've experienced, the harm they've experienced, by comparing their story to other people, by saying, well, I shouldn't complain. They'll even use that language. I shouldn't complain, but this isn't complaining. This is naming. There's a difference between naming and blaming. Naming is being honest with what we've experienced. Blaming is pointing the finger at others for what they have done, rather than just being honest. People compare their stories to others, but everything impacts us uniquely because we are unique as people made in God's image. Something that heavily impacts one person may have a different impact or a lesser impact on someone else. So we've got to name the trauma in our lives. Dr. Dan Allender, who's a trauma therapist, brilliant man, often talks about how the truth of the pain in our story and how we've been harmed by others is actually far worse than we think. It's actually far worse than we think. Think about it this way. Jesus didn't raise you. Jesus wasn't your mom or your dad. Every parent sins against their kids and harms them. It's the reality of living outside of the Garden of Eden. And we can't truly honor our parents without being honest about their humanity and the ways that they've harmed us. And actually to downplay or dismiss how they harmed us is to put them on the level of God. It's a form of idolatry. It's to say that they are holy, that they are perfect, that they are sinless. Yet God is the only one who is those things, who is holy, who is perfect, who is sinless. Paul wrote in Ephesians 6:4, "Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger by the way you treat them." The fact that he wrote that shows that parenting well does not come naturally, and it is something that has to be strived for and cultivated. Further, as we think about being a Christian doesn't mean you're going to escape trauma. It doesn't mean you're going to escape the attacks, the absences. I mean, all we have to do is to look at Scripture to see this, that Joseph was betrayed by his brothers and sold into slavery in Genesis 37. Potiphar was lied to by his wife, and Joseph was lied about in Genesis 39. Noah and his family faced the flood and the uprooting of their family in Genesis 7. Moses was abandoned by his parents as an infant, Exodus 2. Jesus himself, we just celebrated Easter. We know this. Jesus himself, we saw this, was publicly mocked, tortured, stripped naked, and killed unjustly for crimes he did not commit. Everyone will experience trauma. Christians will experience trauma in this world. And we have to know and to name that in our lives so that we can seek healing for it. And trauma results in what I call the 3 B's. The 3 B's: beliefs, behaviors, and bodily responses. Beliefs, behaviors, and bodily responses. Beliefs. So many of the lies, in fact, probably all the lies we believe in life come from trauma. Beliefs about ourselves, that we're inadequate, unlovable, worthless. Beliefs about God, that he can't be good, that he's not loving, that we can't trust him. Beliefs about other people, that they're going to harm us, that they're untrustworthy, that we can't trust other people, so we just got to look out for number one and trust ourselves. All of those things are trauma responses. Those are all beliefs that we have. Trauma leads to behaviors that I've mentioned before. Food addiction, looking at pornography, walking around constantly being angry. It affects the ways we relate to other people, constantly being angry and pushing other people away, not trusting other people, having challenges in relationships. And what happens is over and over again, neuroscience shows us this: the more we return to the same beliefs, the same behaviors, the same responses, it creates fixed neurological pathways in our brain, kind of like muscle memory, fixed ways of thinking and acting in our life. And that's why it can be so hard to change beliefs, to change behaviors, to change styles of relating, because it has changed our brain. It has created these fixed neurological pathways in our brain. And then the last way is that trauma leads to these bodily responses. Bessel van der Kolk, in his book, The Body Keeps the Score, says, traumatized people chronically feel unsafe inside their bodies. The past is alive in the form of gnawing interior discomfort. Their bodies are constantly bombarded by visceral warning signs, and in an attempt to control these processes, they often become experts at ignoring their gut feelings and a numbing awareness of what is playing out inside. They learn to hide from themselves. Trauma impacts not just our souls, but our bodies, because we are embodied souls. It impacts us in so many ways in life. We've got to name trauma in our life. In Psalm 147:3, it says that Jesus came to bind up the brokenhearted. But we have to know how we've experienced brokenheartedness in our life in order to bring that to Jesus and to others and to seek healing for it. And many times this happens over time, not in an instant, by sitting with a safe person and sharing what we've been through, by sitting with a therapist and sharing what we've been through and experience them affirm our experiences as they're attuned to us, as they listen to us, as they resonate with the pain we've gone through. Many things appear so normal to us, but they're actually traumatic, and we need others to point that out. And so we might be talking about our life or a story or something that happened, and we've never thought it was painful, but somebody else can bring that out and help us to truly name it and honor our pain by helping us be honest about our pain. The second thing that has really helped me is learning how to feel with God and safe people. Learning how to feel with God and safe people. We've got to allow ourselves to feel the anger and grief. So often we just try and move past it because it's uncomfortable. Whereas if you look all throughout the Psalms, the psalmists, David, so many times are just letting themselves feel. They're grieving, they're crying out, they're lamenting. They're mourning the injustice done to them. That's the body's natural way of processing trauma, is by grief, by allowing that to happen in your life. And then as we're experiencing safety from somebody else, that's so comforting to us. Jesus said in Matthew 5:4, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." When we mourn, we need to be comforted by God and by other people. And there's this healing that happens. That's why I think he says, blessed. There's this healing that happens when we mourn and when we allow ourselves to be comforted. We need to learn to cry out to God about what we're experiencing, to journal through it, to sit with God, to go on walks and just talk to God. I do that regularly. I talk to him about the pain, the trauma, the experiences, the distressing experiences I'm having. And I talk to him about it. Talk to a friend about it. See a therapist who specializes in EMDR, story work, or psychodynamic theory to help you in this process, to help you heal from the trauma that you've experienced. Neuroscience shows that the neurons in your brain rewire and help you heal when someone sits with you. When someone is attuned to your pain, that means they're in touch with your pain and they see it in you. They resonate with it. Their facial expressions, their eyes show that they're having compassion on what you're sharing. And they grieve with you. Our neurons in our brain start to rewire and heal when that happens. All throughout the Bible, we see this. People mourning, grieving, being angry, and letting themselves feel the pain. In the Old Testament, this is so interesting. When someone died, it was custom to take 7 days to mourn their death, sometimes even longer. Genesis 50:10 says, "When they reached the threshing floor of Atad, near the Jordan, they lamented loudly and bitterly. And there Joseph observed a 7-day period of mourning for his father." If we avoid our feelings, our grief, our anger, it's going to come out in some other way. It's going to come out through coping in an unhealthy way, individually, through sin, through other things, through bodily responses, or it's going to come out in our relationships with other people. The third principle is to reframe the lies. Reframe the lies. Trauma often leads us to believe lies about ourselves, like I've shared, like we're a reject, like we're worthless, like we're inadequate. We need to look over the attacks and the absences, the big T trauma, the little t trauma, and think and identify, what have I believed as a result of it? What have I believed about myself? What lies do I believe? What lies have I started to believe about God? What lies do I believe about other people? Think through that. We need God to help us replace those lies, to identify the truth of who he is, who he says we are as well, all throughout Scripture. And when we start believing those lies again from traumatic experiences, to tell ourselves the truth, to take every thought captive, to sit with God and allow him to comfort us and to show us his love and his approval of us over and over again, that starts to rewire our brain. For me, it's been so helpful memorizing certain verses of Scripture, like 1 John 3:1. See what kind of love the Father has given to me that I should be called a child of God. And to sit with God in that and experience his love. Because of that deep trauma lie of believing that I'm worthless, experiencing his love and telling myself the truth that I am a loved child of God over and over again has really helped change my default way of viewing myself throughout the years. So identify the lies you believe, identify the truth of Scripture, and sit with God and renew your mind. And make sure it's experiential, not just intellectual. Experience the truth of God and his love for you. One of my therapists years ago, Dr. Ted Roberts, used to say, we can't change the past, but we can reframe the past. We can reframe the past. That's the good news. It's moments and messages that wound us, that harm us. It's those traumatic moments that lead to messages that we continue to experience and live in, and the lies we believe. But it's these new moments with God, with other people, and new messages where we experience love and acceptance that starts to really heal us. The last thing is to heal in relationships. This kind of piggybacks on some of the things I've been talking about today. But ultimately, we're hurt through experiences in relationships, and we heal through experiences in relationships. The New Testament uses the words one another 100 times. We're told to pray for one another, confess our sins to one another, to not give up meeting with one another. Overwhelmingly, it shows that we need one another. We need people. We need safe people day in and day out to support us, encourage us, help us, to love us. We need deep love where we have experienced acts of deep harm and rejection over and over again. And the good news is that God tells us we can be healed. We can be transformed by the renewing of our mind, as it says in Romans 12:2. It's really interesting that brain scans show that activities like exercise, mindfulness, learning new skills, all of those things can reverse the effects of trauma that I talked about earlier on the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the prefrontal cortex. Our brains, they're moldable, they're changeable all throughout our life. And so today is not too late for your brain, for your soul to start healing. Your brain can change. It can rewire. The symptoms you experience can lessen drastically. And that's what I've experienced in my life through years of practices, of implementing these things, of spending time in therapy sessions, of spending time with God and safe people, of redirecting my thoughts, renewing my mind, of mindfulness and meditations. Like if you just go on YouTube and search for body scans. Body scans help you just get in touch with your body. It's nothing weird, get in touch with your body and feel safe more and more in your own body. Understanding what anxiety is about for me, what triggers it, telling myself the truth, calming my mind and my body over and over again. The anxiety, the depression, things like that have lessened drastically. Food addiction has gone away almost completely. Pornography, I've been free from it for almost 12 years. It's been almost 12 years. I haven't looked at it. And I share that because this is real. God designed our brains to heal, our souls to heal, our bodies to heal as we live into his ways, as we apply a lot of the things I shared today. He renews us. He heals us. He's at work in us. The Bible says he's at work in us to will and to act according to his good pleasure. He takes delight in healing us, in his Spirit healing us and renewing us. And it just takes us starting to reach out, starting to implement these things, starting to work through these things and inviting him in. He deeply cares about us. So I hope those things were encouraging to you today. Again, if you haven't already, join our Discord community. Go to resolutionmovement.org/join. Hop into the Discord community where we're talking about overcoming trauma, mental health struggles, porn addiction, all kinds of things. We give you the tools to work through that and to help other people work through that. We've got over 500 people in that Discord community now, and we love for you to be a part of it.